Ryan, I'm gonna
Hey,
start.
man.
I'm ousting you first here right now.
All right, oust me.
Okay, you have abandoned me, and
I have?
he's no okay. You know the podcasters coalition that exists in the world, the very real organization of podcasters that you can only be in if you are a podcaster.
It sounds factual. Yeah.
If you want to stay in that, you have to. There's a thing that you have to always do, always,
Okay.
and you've stopped doing it, and I'm kind of upset at you. You know what you did?
No, I have no idea.
You don't have any guesses.
Not that I can, not that I can think of. No.
Okay, well, he catch this guy red-handed. Put a bounty on his head. I've been watching a lot of One Piece. It's a very expensive bounty because he stopped using Audacity.
Oh, yeah.
The Audacity.
I feel like I think Audacity is like the most used.
I mean, it's free.
Audio
You
program.
smack it on, it records the thing, and you're done. Well,
But I honestly do not think that UI has changed since 2005.
you can't change perfection. Well, you probably can. You can change perfection.
Even the
make it worse.
website that
You don't need
download
to.
it from.
Yeah,
They make it so
It's-
even you can run it on a potato, I think.
it looks super sketchy. He's abandoned me, and I'm not too happy about it. Just found out about this a couple minutes ago. Heart's still broken.
Yeah, I've been using
healing.
Audition for at least the last 4 or 5.
That's it.
Well,
I mean-
I've used it to edit, but now I'm using it to record just because it takes, one less extra step. And I'm all about laziness. So
Yeah, we'll just have me sitting back here,
Okay.
back in the old like early 2000s, all alone, because Ryan has a fancy schmancy other recording thing. He gets his beautiful
Sorry.
voice put into. It's just not right. It's not right. Sorry, I'm a little.
hate to break it to you, man.
You broke it to me already, and my heart's in twain.
Speaking of broken, how many times did you break something while you're making your chair that you just made?
My chair? What are you talking about?
Ah, damn it, your desk.
Come on, man. You got to be on the ball here. I know it's in the end of the day.
I had one thing.
You had one thing to do.
I have a new chair. That's what I was thinking about.
I had a new chair. We're jumping all over the place. I've stopped using that chair.
Sorry, this is Dungeon Crawl at night.
We're
We're recording this literally the day it comes out, just at midnight.
We've done this before.
It's been a while.
We're both exhausted because, as Ryan just said, I just built a desk from IKEA. Now, I've built things from IKEA before, and I've built things before. Of course, I was at theaters.
Swedish construction, man. Never fails.
In their email to me today that told me the thing was delivered, it said "Hey" with HEJ. And I didn't notice until I checked it like 5 times.
I did want to back up, though. You said you stopped using your chair?
Yes. So for context, again, I probably mentioned, but I got a new chair, that Secret Lab Omega boy, from like a few weeks ago. I set it up and I've been using it. And every day my back pain had just been increasing. Could not find a spot that worked. Occasionally it would be okay if I like laid down. That was great. But
Interesting.
it's not an ergonomic chair.
No,
Like-
that's true. It's not. It's not.
And I don't mean that as like the buzzword, but the seat, the back of it is flat. There's no curvature to it. They give you a pillow, but it.
I mean, I
it's
guess I'm
just
glad I
not
got
right.
the one I got then.
Yeah, well, my back's also kind of wonky because it's like one side's sticking out farther than the other, so it just
Well,
pushes
let me
harder
say,
into-
I got the Ergo Chair 2, and you can customize this thing, adjust it to your will, whatever you feel like you need. You can do it with this chair.
Damn. Okay. Well, I can't do that with the desk that I made, but it did take me like a near 4 to 5 hours to finish. And I was a theater student. I built things. I use power tools. I do stuff. I'm savvy on occasion, but this broke me. I was sweating. My back hurts.
Damn.
Not from the chair. I've alleviated that because I swapped back to my old one. But I'm just very exhausted. Hence this
Happy Labor Day
long-winded-
to you, man.
Happy. Oh, wasn't that funny?
Yeah.
Well, I'm sitting on the desk now. It's nice and pretty. My monitors are side by side, and it's a
Ew.
new day. It took a lot to fabricate, create, and put everything in the right spot, and that's a lot like our topic today, Ryan. Well, first he's Ryan,
Oh, he's Braxton.
and we're today on the Dungeon Crawl. We're gonna be talking about dungeons, even though I just asked Ryan to talk about it. But
We're going to take our own foray into. I'm surprised, honestly, it's saying this many episodes to actually talk about dungeons on the Dungeon Crawl podcast. But
yeah.
hey,
Can
whatever.
we address that real quick?
Yeah.
I know you just addressed it, but we have neither described what a dungeon is or what a dragon is. We've probably described a dragon, but we've definitely not done the dungeon. And this is the dungeon crawl, as you have
I
pointed
also
out.
don't think you or I have ever, and I've not been in every game you've played in D&D, so I could be wrong. At least me, I have never done a quote-unquote dungeon crawl.
You've made them?
No. I mean, we'll talk about the differences between what I would say a dungeon and a dungeon crawl is. I've done dungeons, but dungeon crawls to me are extended dungeons, and those aren't that fun.
I don't think I've done those either. They scare me big time.
The closest thing we would have done would be Curse of Strahd, the castle. That was an extended kind of dungeon crawl.
There were so many doors in that place.
It's a castle, dude.
You don't need that many doors.
Have you been in a castle? They got doors galore.
Okay, well, at least they make sense.
It's also the name of my new door company.
Doors galore. Ryan's door store. Doors galore.
You got oak, you got brass, you got them all.
Oh my goodness. I could see you doing that. Being Wookie Wonky. You got the arm flailing dude on the side of the road. His cars pass by you. Wind blowing. So,
and some poor bastard making minimum wage, flipping a sign around.
That's so stressful, man. Hats off to anybody who makes a living doing that. Jeebus Crupst. So, as we always do, and as I'm learning now that we need to always start at the beginning, as I like to get ahead of myself, what is an dungeon?
This is a good question. So in preparation for this episode, I asked my girlfriend, I was like, hey, so let's pretend you're a DM and you're making your first dungeon. What questions do you have? And the first thing she said is, what is a dungeon? What classifies? I mean, what does classify as a dungeon? Is it the typical is it an actual castle dungeon? I'd say half the time, maybe 90% of the time, no, it doesn't.
I guess that's true. I mean, if you get away from D&D, I see dungeon as, people run in and literally all it is a place with random enemies and loot or things to grab.
Yeah.
That's it. Like
or an
specifically
MMO, a dungeon is a World of Warcraft dungeon is kind of like a mini raid.
Yeah. Stuff like that. But from my D&D point of view, at least until I just started having to think about it for this episode, I figured a dungeon was just any sort of thing that you needed a map for that had rooms and whatnot, and people were going in, and there's combat, and there's treasure, and anything that was that, no matter how big or small, is a dungeon. Yeah. That's my definition, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with that. The DM's guide even just says some dungeons are old strongholds, or they're abandoned by the folks who built them. Others are natural caves or weird lairs carved up by foul monsters. They have cults and tribes and reclusive creatures. It's a very kind of catch-all term for basically just encounters happen here and plot points happen.
Do plot points even need to happen, though?
They don't need to, no, but oftentimes they will, especially if you're doing a module. The dungeons will be kind of the big climax of the end of the arc or the end of a certain chapter. And then you'll move on to the next chapter where you go to a town or you go to different things, and you solve stuff, and then it concludes again with another big kind of dungeon.
I think a good point to go back to and hold on here is the beginning of D&D. What were those things called? Dungeon Crawl Classics or something?
Yeah.
At least that's what it is called now.
That's a current company that's making stuff.
Well, in a similar vein, Dungeons and Dragons didn't really have that much of a story to it, or inherently. It was just
Gary Gygax's stuff. Yeah, it did not.
It was all just Inception inside of Gary Gygax's mind, basically. Explore the many levels and squares and eldritch blasts that may take place inside the folds of his brain.
It very much was built. I think role-playing, it's a newer concept to D&D than the metagame kind of style was, building the best character and going into dungeons and going to a con and just playing through someone's dungeon that they made, a long dungeon. The Tomb of Horrors was made specifically to just be as hard as possible, so these guys who thought they'd made the best characters could go through it and survive or die.
It's almost like a rogue light in a sense.
Yeah,
I mean, you have a character with stats already that you've kind of leveled up depending on what you're doing. But I'm certain that back then there were some dungeons where you started at level 1 and leveled up pretty quickly, and you started
Oh,
picking up items. And then if
yeah.
if you're
I mean,
dead, you're dead. You do the next one.
you were talking directly about Dungeon of the Mad Mage.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that is, and we're kind of getting ahead, not really ahead of ourselves, but there's a term called a mega dungeon.
Oh,
And
yeah, I've heard of those.
Waterdeep Dungeon of the Mad Mage is basically that. It starts from level 5 and goes to level 20. And it's an extremely long. I mean, you could basically say each level of the dungeon is a self-contained dungeon or town, even for some, but they are as a whole a big connected mega dungeon.
I'd be super curious about that. So this is in Waterdeep, yeah? You said?
Yes, it
Okay.
takes place underneath Waterdeep, as far as I'm aware.
So there is a story to it, and since it takes so long, I assume it's not just combat, right?
There is a lot of combat, yeah, but there is, I
Okay.
mean, there's puzzles, there's, NPCs you talk to, there's factions and different warring stuff going on underneath here. But yeah, there's a lot of levels you go down. You
All
are
right.
supposed to, yeah, level up to 20 eventually if you go through the whole thing.
That's cool because a lot of people don't really get to utilize leader levels, etc. But what this tells, at least me and everybody else listening right now, is that dungeons are kind of like an amorphous blob. As long as you can explore, there are things to kill or get, you're good.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it. And it can even be random. You don't even have to prep a layout before. But I suppose the
Oh,
next thing that we get into is how the heck do DMs make them
yeah, where do you start?
and why?
You
Because
start with the
I struggle with
location?
that.
Where's
Yeah,
it going to be? Do you start with the villains that are inside, the creatures that inhabit it, your plot points that you want to have, the layout? I mean, that's a toughie.
I think, I mean, even rather than just having all those options and not knowing where to go, it's kind of like, what do you need it for, right?
Right. What is this? What purpose does this thing serve?
Yeah. So I mean, it depends on where you are in creating your campaign. We've talked a bit about where to start and whatnot. There's some earlier episodes with titles in campaign, and check those out. But if you're, I guess, creating a town and you've got stuff going on and you've got a quest line now, and they eventually need to go into a forest or a mountain, and there just so happens to be a cave, well, you probably want to have a map plotted out with monsters prepped there, unless you are super genius and you've got the encyclopedia in your brain like the good old Gary Gygax did. Otherwise,
Yeah.
you probably want to get prepping. So, I mean, truly the first step is just, where am I in my prep? Or do I just literally want to make a blank dungeon I could throw out anywhere? You could even just do that.
Definitely. I mean, there's a book called the Mini Dungeon Tome, I believe. That it's basically it's 2 pages per dungeon, sometimes just one, and they are more or less just drag and drop dungeons. You can add those anywhere into your campaign, or even just a fun one shot.
And if you don't have the resources or the time to get a book about it, then I need you to clarify, is that mini, like small, or mini as in a lot? Or both?
MINI, yeah, small.
That's not where I thought they were going to go.
Because each dungeon's small.
Oh, they're only small? Okay. I need
It
chonkers,
takes up
man.
a page.
Give me big dungeons. We need big
That's a
dungeons.
mega dungeon, man.
So even if you don't have that, at least get some sort of medium where you can write or draw either digitally or handwritten, whatever you're
Craft
doing.
paper, something.
Burn candle wax onto your tablecloth and make squares out of it. I don't know. You can even just get that and start drawing squares and make rooms and just pretend you're a little architect and you're making a floor plan.
Even adding to that, a fun way I've seen, and I've done it a couple times, mainly for one shots, is you take like 5 dice, shake them up in your hand, drop them, and then where they land, that's the layout of your dungeon.
Ooh, I've seen that for campaign planning, like an entire world, and I forget the guy's name.
Continents as well.
That's the first place I saw it. The person who did the Dalian Tomb, well, whatever his name is, you remember?
Matthew Colville.
That's a good guy right there. He's got great information. He's probably talked about making dungeons before, so definitely give him a check out. That's another resource for you there. But what are the tools that we have in terms of just very bare bones before we even get to like web addresses you can go to craft random dungeons, etc.? Like, what do you need to have or know when you're crafting a floor layout for a dungeon?
Well, I think it's always important to keep of the size, like you were just talking about. how big or how small. I think for dungeons, obviously know your players. If they prefer dungeon crawls, which you should have done and figured out by session 0, then maybe make a longer dungeon. But for games that I like to run, I always think you should keep it simple. There was a contest that happened a while ago called the 1-page dungeon contest. And it's fitting the entirety of the dungeon and what you would need to know to run that dungeon all on the single, 8.5 by 11 page. And I think that's a good example of being able to utilize, not go too over the top with it. Getting everything you need done to that on a page. And I recommend starting there, using just a single page. One page for your prep, the other page for the layout and everything else you need to know.
I definitely get stressed out too, because you're alluding to like all these options that we have. And when I've tried to make dungeons before, when I have made them, it's always, okay, I've used a random generator to just poop out a layout. There's a ton of rooms here. I need to populate them, put stuff in here. Ultimately, I end up improving it and it works out well, but I would very much like to consider the climate, the location, what kind of monsters could fit in here. But I end up like getting to the first room and I'm like, okay, they walk in, it's a space, and I put some flavor text here and there. And I look at the monster manual and I just can't come up with a decent amount of variety for it. And then I always get stuck there, and then I either stop or just end up improving it for the session that is to come. But for you and the campaigns that we play together, at least the one that you DM for me, combat's mostly taking place in cities or in a room, not necessarily a dungeon that we've gone into. I think there's been like a couple of encounters that we've had like that, but for the most part, it's organic stuff. Like we're traveling somewhere and something comes up, or we're taking a rest. But I still would like to ask you, like, have you been able to get past that problem that I just mentioned that I have a lot? Do you run into the same issue when you're making a dungeon, or is it
definitely
pretty simple?
It's very easy to get overwhelmed when making a dungeon with all the options. You like, especially if you're like, okay, you have all these ideas, you want to fit them all in, you're adding rooms, adding places, and then it actually happens and the players take a left instead of the right, and now they're nowhere close to half the stuff you spent your prep on. Mm-hmm. And then they never go back that way because maybe you described it weirdly and they think that place is a little too dangerous. They don't want to go that direction.
Oh, shit. The bicycle meme where you put the stick in the front wheel and you're like, heck. Blame somebody else for it.
So I do think, when creating a dungeon, like I said, keep it simple, stupid. Use the KISS rule. And there's a very famous, kind of like a theory almost, when it comes to dungeon crafting for Dungeons and Dragons, called the 5-room dungeon. Keeping it consistent, keeping it small, keeping it short and concise, and almost making it like a themed dungeon makes it a lot easier to prep these. Very similar to like Sly Flourish's Lazy Dungeon Master stuff. This is very almost like a formulaic way of making them, each room having a specific purpose. Room 1 being the entrance and a guardian. Maybe it's trapped or it's hidden, and there's a guardian here that's to keep intruders out, or the guardian is an NPC that's not necessarily a quote-unquote guardian, but a guy that found it and doesn't want to go in, so informs the players what this place is. Room 2 has a puzzle or some sort of role-playing challenge. Maybe it's a door that won't open unless you talk to it or say some special, kind of answer it in some funny way. Or there's a specific magical puzzle. Then they say room 3 is the red herring. This is the room that's supposed to kind of build tension and to make the players think that they've finally found the answer that they're looking for. Specifically if this is a quest that they're going towards. Maybe they confront a boss that they think is the final boss, and then they find out, shnikes, there's something else. The sarcophagus contains something else inside it than they were expecting. Room 4 is where the big battle, the climax, takes place. This is where you bring in all your big bucks. You're using every trick in your repertoire. And the final room is the plot twist. This is where you pull the rug out from underneath your players, say, that guy who you thought was the big boss, well, he was actually just practicing. He's actually building up to help this guy achieve his goals.
I was expecting it to be the treasure room, and I'm disappointed, and it's probably the effect that it's going for.
Well, that or there's something that's guarding the big treasure room, yeah? Or the treasure is stolen by somebody else. Now that's another plot hook. You got to keep following where that goes.
Man, can't you DMs just give us treasure and let it be done? Go home,
This
have a
ties
nice
in very
day.
nicely to our last episode, magic items.
Oh boy, those are good ones.
How do you
That was
populate
fun
this
stuff.
dungeon with magical items? It can be intimidating.
Yeah, oh man. At first, I guess, of course, take an inventory of how your party's doing, etc. Go listen to the last episode we did. We talk a little bit about that, but it's just why is there a chest here and why is this item here? I do not know, but I put it here, Ryan. I'm confused. Is basically what happens most of the time. And I'll be running through a dungeon, improving, and it's just like, well, they haven't found anything yet, and they've been fighting shit, so I should probably give them something. Yeah,
true. But you always ask your question is why? Yeah, why is this here? And you can maybe it's tough to find an answer, but if you find an answer, then it can be a cool lore history answer, and made the players are like this item. You know, this item was here because Jeff is some mastermind mage that crafted it ages ago and left it here and then died in the dungeon farther on.
How dare he litter in this dungeon with his magic?
He's
awful.
Dead, man. It's not his fault.
He could die somewhere else in like a recycling compost or a graveyard. But no, he's
if only it was that easy
stuff here for easy pickings.
We don't choose where we die.
All right. So do you use anything in particular when you're adding items, or is it just like, oh, I was scrolling on Instagram or Twitter or Reddit and I found this good item and I guess like now's a good time to put it in here?
I'm not so sure. I make inventory of the ones that I like, that I see while, reading through a book, or, you're looking at the Griffin saddlebag, stuff like that. I keep record of the ones I like and write them down and then make sure I use them later if they fit the theme of the dungeon that I'm going for. Or the history of this dungeon, like it was an old temple, so maybe there's a cleric item or a paladin item that's been forgotten in this temple, something like that.
Okay. And to some extent, is there like a golden rule, like you've just kind of mentioned with rooms for giving out items, or can you just hide them all in there and it's really up to your discretion about how much they get?
No, it's up to your discretion for sure. I mean, you could, like we covered in the Magic Items episode, if you put one somewhere and you have it in your back pocket because the players missed it, your next dungeon might be a good place to put it. Or you build this really cool dungeon and the players, again, decided to turn left instead of right in the forest, plop it somewhere else. Take that exact same theme. If it was a sandy temple, a pyramid or something, and now the players they didn't go in that pyramid, and now they're in the underwater. Just move that pyramid underwater and then change some of the effects that would happen inside. That the sand that's leaking from the top is instead now water leaking from the top.
Dude, no, imagine the sunken pyramids, like actually underwater pyramids. That would be a pretty cool little scene there for you to pop in. That's another cool thing to do with dungeons and spectacles. You can kind of go all out with it, I assume. But
yeah, Sly Flourish, we talked about him earlier, calls those fantastic locations and fantastical features. Yeah,
that's such a good piece of information, at least everything that he's written for the Lazy Dungeon Master, or however he worded that. So far, it's you need items if you want in your dungeon for it to be somewhat of a reward, or plot hooks or rewards in terms of answers for the plot itself. There's lots of ways for you to reward people. Stuff for you to fight. I mean, we talk about a lot of monsters, so maybe you got some ideas on who to use there, but you can just creep through monster manuals and find themes. But other than that, once you've got your layout and you start putting things in there and you describe rooms, truly that's about all it is. So I guess at this point, like, rather than just saying, okay, sit down with a piece of paper, like it's the beginning of the class and we're forcing you to do math from your brain rather than a calculator. I guess there's the time now to start talking about tools in a sense.
Yeah.
And my favorite one that I think also is not a great idea for small dungeons is Dungeon. However, do you know the exact address for that? DONJON dot what?
It's .bin.sh.
All right. This thing here, man.
And Donjon, DONJON.
And it's got a ton of stuff here But if you go to D&D 5e, where you see after you follow that address, there's Magic Items Monsters tier list, but they also have a random dungeon generator. And it's interesting because if you're somebody who just maybe is having a brain fart and can't come out with a layout, you can name the dungeon here, add its level, so what player level you guys are at, the party size, etc., motif if you want. And the reason it's asking all these questions is because it will populate these rooms with a randomly generated description that will make sense and some enemies for them to encounter.
Yeah.
So when you end up constructing it, it can actually be kind of finicky with the size. And sometimes what comes out is something that is a mega dungeon. Like I clicked on a medium-sized dungeon. So this tool is definitely more so what Ryan's talking about in the terms of a traditional dungeon or a mega dungeon. There's like 40 corridors here. There's 20-something rooms, 30-something rooms I'm actually seeing. But I mean, if you're wanting to do something intense like this and you don't have the time to map it all out, it literally has numbers in the rooms. Each door has a certain symbol on it. And if you click on a room, it takes you below to the description where it tells you that there's a locked room with what DC to have and what's in there. And sometimes there's a description or creepy or whatever. And it's useful if you're like really, really pressed for time. But or
even just the improv, like if the players walk into an area that you weren't expecting, okay, boom, pop this in front of them.
Yeah. Like there's a ton of size here. There's from fine, diminutive, tiny, small, all the way to colossal. There's like 8 options.
Yeah, colossal. You want to know how many rooms that has?
I'm kind of scared.
275.
Well, who does this?
That's a mega dungeon by far.
I guess let's talk about mega dungeons too. Who are these for?
These are for people that like just straight up dungeon crawling, going through, finding items, leveling up. I don't want to sell it too short. I want to say that it's not for people that like story, because some of these mega dungeons can have really intricate factions, and definitely if you're doing a mega dungeon, utilize factions, have different, I don't mean factions just in the way that like Fallout uses factions, like the Volt people versus the bandits. I mean more so like this monster group doesn't like this monster group and is warring with them and fighting for their territory, while this monster group is kind of ambivalent and is kind of keeping an eye on everything, and have the players be able to interact with them. And maybe instead of the goblins attacking the players, they see them and go, oh my God, the gods have bestowed us with people to kill our enemies. And they, try to rally them to go fight the other factions. Because otherwise, these mega dungeons for certain players will definitely drag on.
Oh yeah. I think it's important to have players that, if you're doing a mega dungeon, people that are pretty quick at doing their turn in combat and are kind of pretty adept at the game. It's not to say it's off limits for anybody at all. That is definitely not the case. If you're really interested in doing a mega dungeon and you don't like RP and you're all new, absolutely go for it. But it will drag on eventually until you guys learn how to do your turns quickly. And
it's also not saying that these massive dungeons are just combat focused. They are definitely skewed toward that, but there is still a lot of RP and stuff to be had.
Oh yeah, and puzzles can be fun too as well. I really, really love those. And if you're a fan of puns that solve doors and open them for you, oh boy, can you throw a lot of... If there's 200 rooms, 200 puns and 200 doors or more that connect to those rooms.
I truly do recommend, if you do like these mega dungeons, definitely look at Dungeon of the Mad Mage. I think that is a mega dungeon done well, where these levels are separated, and they are these nice cohesive, like 26 room dungeons. Even that's still a lot for a regular sized dungeon, but it does also then connect to a larger story if you so wish for it.
Absolutely. And I think maybe if you're starting to struggle with how to populate rooms, if you're not just going with something that's pre-made, like what Ryan's been talking about, something that I constantly use for generating stuff that's actually in beta right now is D&D Beyond's Encounter Fabricator, whatever they call it. And we could definitely do a conversation on how to balance encounters or even craft them.
Definitely.
Outside of even considering combat or encounters aren't just fights. Like, you still need to consider a lot of facets to it. But for specifically encounters with monsters, it's a really great one. It allows you to put even your player's entire what's it called? The character sheet on there.
Oh, cool. See, I've never used the D&D Beyond one.
I love it. It's pretty simple, and of course, the downside is if you're a paper kind of person. And sorry, there's a lot of rain out, but it's really aesthetic right now. Good mood for making a dungeon. Hopefully it doesn't show up. But if you're making an encounter, it takes everything you've got in there. You might need some source material if you don't want to just use the basic stuff from Monster Manual, Player's Handbook, etc. But it's super great. You can categorize it by biome, by how deadly you want it to be or how easy you want it to be. Maybe you just need like 2 or 3 easy encounters they can knock out until they get to the deadly one where you're like, I kind of want them to maybe possibly die. And you give your like group of 3 level 1 people like a Hydra, and you're like, yeah, you're just dead. But it really allows you to customize every tweet.
Have you used Kobold Fight Club?
I haven't, but I have heard of it.
It's basically what you're describing, but it's not in beta.
Okay.
And it allows you to it has some third-party content already in it. Such as the Creature Codex or the Tome of Beasts. So if you own those, obviously with these, you would have to own those products. Even the regular 5th edition stuff, you'd have to own it. It just says like if you make a random encounter, then it will say what the monster is and where you can find it in the book.
Yeah.
But you can choose the environment, the alignment, legendary, max CR, min CR type, all that jazz.
So I guess a lot of these combat generators have the same features. D&D Beyond is basically trying to be the end-all be-all point, so kind of making each thing that they can, so they keep you on their website.
There was one a while ago that I really liked. I don't think it exists anymore, but you would choose a monster from the Monster Manual only, and it would then populate an encounter of things that monster would have in its ecology that would be around it.
Okay.
That was because the only problem with a lot of these random encounter things is you'll choose a random medium encounter and it just has an archer with a Duragar and an Okitty. It's like these things would never exist together.
Yeah, well, that's a good segue into the fact and reason why these random generators exist is because it takes a while to either amass a literal library of monster manuals, areas, and etymology, and biomes, and having all of that in your brain, being able to smack it on and make it make sense. But I definitely recommend, and I know this is blasphemy coming from me, but read some stuff and things. Look at a map, or even just like you're going to a cave, your player's going to a cave. Look at some stalactites and stalagmites and listen to the noises and try to make descriptions on how they sound to you, and then just plop that into your dungeons that are relevant. I'm sure Ryan does this.
Yeah, I could not recommend more when going through a dungeon. The easiest way to make this thing fleshed out and feel more real, instead of just you walk through this door, you walk through that door, you pass on this corner, is very visually and vividly describing the sounds, the smells, the sights, the things that the players, the characters are encountering and understanding and seeing. Because otherwise it can and will become very monotonous, especially if the dungeon's a sewer, or the dungeon's something that's not visually appealing. You have to appeal to those other senses.
Yeah, we've all got our fancy monitors. I know Ryan's looking at 3 of them. I'm looking at 2 right now because I've only got 2 set up.
4 of them, actually.
Okay, calm down. But imagine your DM is a monitor and it's got some speakers on it, but it pretty much only shows you one color and like the same noise of a hammer like in the background. And you're like, bruh, can you do anything else? Imagine if your monitor couldn't do everything that it does to show you all of the good juicy whatnots and bits. And I know so many people out there have been through these slog of a dungeon where it's like, there's a hall. Okay, yeah, I guess us in the party will go down. Do we need to do perception check? DM says, I guess. I mean, there's a sconce there. You can go down the hall. There's a couple doors. How boring is that?
Well, if you're not the most, you're not Brandon Sanderson or Stephen King. You're not a good author, a good person that visualizes and puts it to words well. Then I definitely recommend to And we are technically a Dungeons and Dragons podcast, but we're also kind of system agnostic. We talk about lots of other stuff sometimes. The Pathfinder dungeon guides and stuff have huge tables and stuff for literally everything. I've printed them all out and put them into my DM's binder.
Shout out to that episode. We were in the same place for that one.
Yeah, I definitely recommend looking through those and pulling them out of your hat if you got to. There's also the Dungeon Alphabet book that I recommend that just has random shit to put into your dungeon. There's also a GM's Miscellany Dungeon Dressing book that is just chock full of random crap that you can just use to dress and to, like I just said, appeal to these different senses very easily, that you don't have to necessarily prepare. You just flip to this page and, okay, this room has several half-burnt candles standing in pools of wax on the altar. And then boom, maybe you just created a whole plotline story that this overall dungeon was was kind of turned into a crypt, an altar for some terrible being that's being worshipped.
Dungeons are for fun. Make them fun or terrible. I don't know what you want to do. It's your MO, but
kill your players.
Oh man, I think it's the key part of everything about Dungeons and Dragons. It's where everything comes from.
It's in the name.
Yeah, it's in our name too, which again, I'm very surprised we haven't started talking about it yet. But for specifically making a dungeon, I think it's good to have a clear start and end as well. Like an entrance and an exit. Don't do the whole Skyrim thing where the entrance is the exit and you always loop back around. If you want to do a meme,
it makes sense in a video game, right? Yeah. But in a game where you can just say you backtrack to the beginning, you don't need to include it.
Yeah, so there's something sticky that I kind of want to navigate through here, and I don't know why I described it this way, but when you're in a dungeon and, I mean, you're doing your best, maybe you map out everything that's going on. In a video game, you have the liberty to walk around as much as you want, look at something as many times as you want on your own time, because there's not a bunch of other people there with you at the same time, and nobody needs to re-describe that thing for you again in order for you to experience it. But in D&D, if you need to be reminded of something, your DM has to describe it another time. If you want to go look at another thing in a room, your party has to all go back, or maybe it's just risky if you don't all go back together. That's the caveat there. But exploring is a lot clunkier than it is in a video game. And that's something that really gets me tired when I'm in a dungeon, or at least in a longer encounter in a specific structured environment, Ryan. And I know you can see it on players' faces when it's just like, okay, there's like the 15th door that we've encountered in here. We've opened like half of them. I can't remember what's what. I have no idea where we're going. What do you recommend in those situations, either for the player or for the DM to do to alleviate that?
Well, don't be afraid as a DM to cut it short.
Yeah,
I know I did a one shot one time when Braxton couldn't make it. I did a one shot for my old campaign. The first group that I ever DM'd for, Braxton couldn't make it, so we decided to just do a quick one shot. And I planned out this longer dungeon, and I could see it was taking longer than I expected. And it's supposed to be a one shot, so I just cut out 3 of the rooms. Luckily, those rooms were just kind of fun encounters, puzzles, and stuff that didn't really have a big impact on the story. Just boom, plopped them out, and they're at the final boss. So if you see the wear and tear on the players' faces, please don't force them to go through it just because you want to hear the excitement on your own voice as you describe the things you painstakingly worked so hard on. It's not always about you, okay? It's not about you. It's about everybody at the table.
Man, it sounded like you were building up. I thought you were going to go on a rant.
Sorry. No, I
one of the greatest monologues in podcast history about Dungeons and Dragons by Ryan Brown.
Grab a hold of the microphone. Here we go. Let's rock.
Get on your soapbox. Dungeons are important, man. And I think it's just so hard to stay into it the entire time when it's numbers and rolling dice and it's not your turn and somebody's taking forever. And literally, this is your 30-second door. And I just want to stop. I just want to haul, and I'm looking down it, and I want Ryan to say, you see one door, you can open it. you go in.
Yeah, that was my
there's the
favorite
next
part
room.
about doing Castle Ravenloft
Oh
in
my
the last
gosh.
campaign. Is all right, you go down this hallway, you see a door to your left, a door in front of you, and a door to your right. And then Braxton's like, all right, we'll go in this room. They describe the room, they do whatever, and then he's like, all right, what are the ways out of here? I was like, okay, well, you got a room, and you got a door in front of you. You got a door also that connects adjoining to the left.
There's a staircase that goes up and down. Sometimes I forget
Yeah.
doors connect to the other doors that I've seen before, but it doesn't.
Yeah, and like
feel
you open
way.
that door, and you're back into the room that you just were in like 5 minutes ago.
These guys are killing trees, man. Like, what's the door made out of? Is it a nice birch wood? Is there a knocker?
No, it's always mahogany, man.
I'm always mahogany. It just depends on what's going on. But that's the biggest issue I encounter as a player when going through dungeons. Now we don't
It's
do.
tough. I mean,
Yeah.
it really depends on the type of player again that you have. Like if you use a DM want to make a labyrinth and force the player, the players would then have to map it out themselves. There's a
That's a
very
pretty good idea.
particular type of person that would enjoy that, and other people would just think it's annoying.
Well, if you're the type of group that's already doing calculations on how much your coins weigh into your encumbrance, things like that kind of crowd, then it could be really cool to have.
Well, some people love that type of note taking. Other people don't.
Absolutely. I mean, imagine like you guys actually need a cartographer, and one player in your party is that, and the map that they draw IRL is actually the map that they're creating as you go, which I think is a pretty cool thing if you guys want to go that route. If you don't just want to have a map, Ryan uses a dry erase thing, so it's pretty easy to use. It's got squares on it.
I was about to say that kind of answers your question earlier about not knowing exactly where you are, unless that's as DM, that's the idea you want the players to have, to be confused and lost. I started getting in the habit of drawing out my dungeons already made and just covering it up with paper. Mm-hmm. And so as the players move through it, I take off the paper and say, all right, this is where you are. Then I give away the dungeon, but to at least let them know, kind of have that press the start button and see the whole map idea.
If you're more inclined to do like a digital footprint sort of thing, one of the most popular ones right now is at least Roll20, of course, where you can do basically the same thing. It has a bit of learning curve occasionally, just because when you're interacting with something with a keyboard and a mouse, sometimes there's just a lot of buttons you got to press. But at a very basic function, it allows you to have representations for the players, squares, and draw out a map. And if you're remote right now, in terms of D&D, which you very likely are, it could be a good thing to go to. Tabletop simulator is something you can also use. That's like even more of a learning curve, but somehow less, and people need to have a pretty okay-ish PC, depending on how many things are there, but it's the same shtick. It's got the very bare minimum stuff that you need. If you want to go crazy, you can with 3D models and whatnot. But those are the two that I've had the most experience with in terms of digital representation. If you really don't want to stick with theater of the mind, you need those squares. You need to know the distance. Your players like that just bit of tactical information. Those are two good things to go with.
Yeah, there's a similar kind of one, but if you've heard of isometric dungeons, there's a really there's a very particular style of map for dungeons. There's a very popular map maker that just came out called the Isometric Dungeon Map Maker.
That's the one that our friend Kenneth told us about, right?
Yes, yeah. It's by Hob. Just the website is Hob, HOB, BYTE.net. Check it out. It's kind of cool.
I want to mess around with this thing.
Yeah, it's definitely there's a little bit to mess with, so you might have to do it on your own time.
I mean, I've seen it before. It is really cool, and I mean, another thing that helps me when I'm doing a dungeon, of course, in the same vein of getting an internal or literal library of things to draw from, go on Pinterest or just Google dungeons or goblin castle or lair. There's a lot of things that are already made, and I'm sure you could just pop into DM's Guild, find a nice pre-made dungeon. You could use what they've got in there, populated rooms, descriptions, or you can chunk all that and just use the layout. There's a bunch of stuff for you guys to look at.
Now,
and all in all, okay, we're gonna stop the train. I'm gonna listen to what Ryan has to say.
So, from experience, you speak from experience for me, please. Here, I need your
I'll think about it.
Expertise.
I'll think about it. Yeah.
No, I need it.
Okay.
So let's say you've been crawling through this dungeon for what feels like
Sorry, that's not
sessions.
Yeah.
Whole sessions have been inside this dungeon. You and your comrades have been through hell and back. Mm-hmm. You're getting hurt. You're getting messed up. You've used your 2 spell slots, and that's it. You're shot. Can you rest?
As a warlock, I sure hope I can.
But should you?
Well, the should or should not depends on your preparations. Yeah. Or did you find a nice cozy room where you feel like you guys are hidden enough? Have you made a lot of noise in the dungeon already? If you've made a ruckus and you've been killing some things and they know you're there, it's probably not the best idea to sleep for an hour or even, God forbid, a long rest. But
God forbid.
You're an entire assassin group and you guys are sneaky as hell, or some other situation where your existence here is not widely known, if you've managed to jump into a room that has a couple of places to hide and you killed the guy that was in it nice and sneaky and you hit his body, yeah, dude, take that rest. Things will happen, though. Things move on in that dungeon while you're sleeping.
Definitely. As a DM, do not let this rest go unwarranted. Don't just let him take it and that's it. This is where the very underutilized spell Catnap comes in handy, though.
True, but not everybody's going to have that. So what if they took as many precautions as they could and genuinely they prepped it? Nobody knows they're here. They're sleeping in this room. It's locked. They've got a preventative spell. Can they earn the rest? Can it just happen?
Which kind
they
of
might
rest is this?
refortify, move around, but I don't know. Come on.
Which rest is this? Short or long?
Definitely short rest.
Okay. I would say for a short rest like that, they've been careful. I'll definitely reward them in the fact that they're not going to get attacked. I think the most thing that would happen is a patrol might come around and see, my 2 friends are missing. They shouldn't they be on the job today? But I think if you're super careful, sure, you deserve that. But if you are going guns or spells ablazing, running through this dungeon, and then decide, you know what? Fuck it. We're taking a long rest here. We're taking a short rest. Either way, I've definitely done this to my players where they took a rest in this longer dungeon. I mean, it's definitely deserved. They definitely needed it. But I definitely had the creatures in this dungeon become aware and understand that there was something else here picking off their friends. So they all ganged up in one room and it turned the fight into a much larger experience than it would have been otherwise. Or traps would be placed down, more traps would be put in rooms they've already gone through. And so they'll, maybe if they're not paying attention, they'll trip up another trap and then get ambushed. Definitely have consequences. Or to prevent this rest from occurring, give them a time limit.
Oh boy. Oh.
And if they rest,
warlocks beware, don't play for Ryan.
And then if their rest happens, then Jess, the damsel in distress, is killed instead of if they didn't take that rest, they would find her on the altar table and they have a chance to save her.
All right, you can be cutthroat like Ryan, but if you're in my game and you took enough precautions, not always is a negative thing going to happen because you guys are healing. Not 100% of the time.
Well, I think there has to be something, because we talked about this in our combat episode, that combat inherently, if you take a rest and you're at 100% before a big boss fight, it won't be hard because you got everything. You got all your hit points, you got all your spell. There's got to be some tension. You got to put them. That's what dungeons are often used for. The 4th room of the 5-room dungeon is used to, the 3rd room of the 5-room dungeon is often used as, it's called the red herring because it makes the players use some of their more precious spells, thinking it's the final boss, and then they go to the 4th room and, oh shit, here's the final boss. Now the tension has been cranked up. You got to make it interesting because then it'll be just a boring dungeon, man.
Yeah. I see your point, and I don't think it's a bad one. Maybe I have been spoiled by video games. Maybe I have been spoiled where there's always a room for me to rest up if I find it, if it was hidden and I earned it.
This makes me interested to see what Baldur's Gate is going to do.
Oh, man. I mean, It's been a while since I've played Divinity Original Sin 2, but there's enough healing items and whatnot.
True, and there's no spell slots.
Yeah. Okay, well, kind of, yeah, there's time stuff. But, man, Warlock's dungeons are tough for you. I feel for you. No, be careful with your spells. Please, especially if you're playing for Ryan. Just don't play for Ryan. That's the moral of the story here today.
Nah, play for me.
No. Oh,
Come.
God, it stresses me out. Now I know, God, I'm being targeted in a dungeon. I can't do a rest, man. It is just not safe. It is also,
you gotta be careful about it.
Pouring down rain outside, Ryan.
Well, be safe, man. Be safe.
I'm kind of spooked.
Put your storm-resistant windows in.
Yeah, they're there.
All right, fine.
Chilling. So, if life was a dungeon, would you get through it unscathed? Would you beat the boss, you think, Ryan?
I hope so, man. I sure do.
I'm so too. This dungeon of 2020 that we're in right now is a crazy one.
It's a long crawl, dude.
And unlike Ryan's awful dungeons, take that rest. You're safe. You got a good space. Don't worry.
Okay, in this metaphor, in this one analogy, you can take that rest.
You can take that rest.
But no, there will be consequences.
God. That's just not right. Oh, God, what kind of DM do I have, man? It's good. Consequences are great and all, but man, yeah, it's not as great as the
don't get me wrong. You got to reward the players, too.
Oh, yeah.
You definitely got to reward them.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And if you're putting this dungeon in front of your player's face, it definitely should be conquerable. But if they're just out in the wilderness and discover this old tomb that's got a necromancer in it, definitely make sure they're aware this is some tough shit they're getting into.
One or two people become a thrall. It's true. It's their fault.
But always plan for, the unexpected when it comes to dungeons.
All right. Do we miss anything? I feel like I did.
I mean, dungeons are inherently an unconquerable beast. There's literally infinite number of them. So
that is very true. Just feel like in a strong basis, you get your layout, you put things in there, and you describe the things. You're good.
The purpose of them, yeah.
And that's it. If you did that, you have a dungeon. You're good to go.
Utilize cults. Cults are fun.
Cults?
Yeah, cults.
They do stuff. They're a little tired, like last year's sweater,
Yeah, but I mean, hey, just because it's used a lot doesn't mean it's bad.
You know what also is tired?
Braxton?
That is very true. You know what's not tired?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
It's easy answer. Easy answer.
Freddy Krueger.
No, okay. You're taking too long. It's the dungeon crawl. It's not tired. Thank you so much for listening to us today.
Oh,
he's been Ryan.
He's been Braxton, as always.
As always, and please do. Also, open that phone of yours if you want.
Okay,
please.
got it open.
You go on to the Instagram or the Twitter, and you hold down the button, or you press the 1, 2, 3 in the bottom left if you're an iPhone user. You put that at and Dungeon Crawl Pod. You'll find us there. That's where we are.
Crawl Pod. Oh, found them. Ryan and Braxton. There they are.
If you want, also in the description here is probably a link that goes to our link tree, and you can follow all the stuff there. Also, there is a thing for the Discord that we have.
What?
The Dungeon Crawl, the community that we've got going on. There's new channels, new things to talk about. I talk about One Piece for literally every day with the people that are there. There's a good group of One Piece friends. If you want to talk about One Piece,
mechanical keyboards into
that's only for me. That's only for me.
But maybe you get some mechanical keyboard friends at some point in your life.
Yeah, guys, if you want to talk to me about mechanical keyboards, get in that dungeon crawl. But really, it's been kind of lively lately, and it's been fun to have a place to chat with people, play games, etc. If you're looking for a community like that, jump in. If you got too many Discord channels and servers that you're in, I understand. But
I don't, because this is the best one that you could be a part of.
Well, dang. You know what else is the best, but actually not the best because it's terrible to do?
Man, you're having some tough ones today. Oof.
Come on, man. You know this one.
Cooking.
That is true. I've got meal prepped in my fridge, and I'm just chomping.
Really? You've prepped some meals? What are you prepping, man?
And by prepped, I mean I purchased them, and they're frozen.
Okay.
Somebody else prepped them, not me.
I guess that's meal. I don't think it's what meal prep is, man.
If you want to feed me, if you want to, or if you hate me, maybe give me like a poisonous package of 5 gold stars if you want, or whatever the hell you call them. I think they're like probably a white color on iTunes, but if you rate us 5 stars on there, it's absolutely
yellow.
terrible. Yellow?
I'm pretty sure they're yellow stars. Yeah.
That, and you can couple that with probably an email that goes to the Dungeon Crawl pod@gmail.com if you want to talk to us about something a bit longer, if you still want to use email. But that's all she wrote. If you want to talk to us,
man,
all she wrote. I don't know who she is and why she's writing and why she's decided to stop here. But again, this has been the Dungeon Crawl.
Yeah, make sure you please do not get caught in the Mad Mage of Kavara's dungeon. That is a nasty place.
Or any of Ryan's.
No, come in mine, please. Let me kill you. Let me murder you, and stuff like that. Definitely rest there too. Yeah, it's safe. I promise.
I was waiting for this to end.
No, it's safe. I promise.
Let me out.